In a previous video, I described the new BBC One period drama Dickensian, which sees loads of characters from different Charles Dickens novels living together on one street, as essentially a piece of televised crossover fanfiction. Well, it turns out I was very wrong because there's been no fucking in it yet, and the entire point of crossover fanfiction is to have characters from different books or franchises fucking, so the lack of fucking does exclude it from the genre. Well, there could be some fucking in it before the end of the series, I haven't watched all of it yet, so guess we'll see on that one. I suppose calling it crossover fanfiction is a bit unfair of me, because when it comes to adaptations of Dickens, they're kinda scraping at the bottom of the barrel as it is. Pretty much everything's already been done with it, so this was just about the only place left to go, save for doing the 50 billionth straight-faced adaptation of Great Expectations, or yet another bloody themed version of A Christmas Carol again. I've got to say though, the fact that a major production is taking a lot of liberty with source material is encouraging, because most TV and movie outlets appear to have forgotten how to adapt things lately. The proliferation of internet culture has given rise to this idea that extreme fidelity is always the ideal. We praise stuff because it's faithful to the source material, when if all you wanted them to do was just regurgitate the book, you do know you could just go back and read the book, right? Not to say that all changes made are good things, of course. If something about the book really works, then of course supergluing a happy ending onto the movie version is a fucking stupid idea. But what I'm saying is, traditionally adaptation is a process of not just translation, but invention. Film and print are two different languages in themselves, and an artist should know how to spin someone else's work into something unique. Stanley Kubrick's The Shining is markedly different from Stephen King's. The Godfather by Mario Puzo is a very different experience to the movies. But just so many adaptations have come out in the last decade or so where you can barely remember who made it and what made it special. Just, it was the book on a film, you got what you paid for, just a straight transposition, which will never make nearly as much impact. However, people are going to remember that the BBC made a TV series of new stories out of bits and pieces of famous Charles Dickens books. And for the better, I say, because as a lifelong classic literature heathen, I was surprised to find myself actually interested in a Dickens adaptation for a change. My total classic literature zealotry was first started in school upon reading Great Expectations for the first time. Basically, my experience in a nutshell, I was kinda into it for the first 200 pages where actual stuff was happening. Then there's this sort of hazy blur for the middle 200 pages where Pip's like, talking about some stuff in a series of rooms or something. And then, oh my god, right, this pigeon landed on my roof and started pecking at my window, and I was like, why is a pigeon doing that? There's got to be some reason, hasn't there? I must spend the next 8 weeks trying to figure it out. It's just that much more interesting. Rest assured, the examiners didn't exactly take to the second half of my GCSE essay where I veered off into discussing the pigeon's motives. Maybe the grade that I got as a result of that essay was what set off my grudge. So getting me watching Dickens is an achievement. I guess I quite like Dickensian because it's essentially a series of scenes about different Charles Dickens characters just sort of patchworked together. Personally, I always felt that Dickens had a tendency to waffle a bit, and while it does take an episode to really get going, lots of scenes are short and to the point. They either do something or tell you something about someone. It is very efficiently scripted. Also, what I like is that it's got an actual interesting plot to hang over it. The death of Jacob Marley. They've built an investigation into Marley's death off of the source material and set up lots of characters that have motive. And while fanfictions do that sort of thing all the time, yes, Dickensian doesn't feel like it's just dry humping the source material for the sake of it like lots of fanfics do. It is trying to tell its own story with a loose basis on the source material. While I was expecting it to be a lot more fanficky than it is, and it is fanficky, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of moments where you're meant to go, ooh look, there's Fagin, and ooh look, that's meant to be Scrooge, and he said humbug, that's like Scrooge's thing. And bits of it act as a prequel to the Miss Havisham that we see in Great Expectations, which kinda does suffer from the general prequel problem of we know how this story's gonna end for her, so you're kind of already anticipating what happens, so you won't be surprised by it. But the show does get the job of getting you invested in the characters and making them feel like actual real humans done pretty nicely. Dickens does often get accused by people like me of writing exaggerated caricatures, which is not so much a bad thing in itself. I mean, he was essentially providing social commentary of the time, and to achieve social commentary efficiently, some exaggeration will be going on. But he was just a very morally black and white writer. The good ones are sweet and innocent to the extremest of extremes, and the bad ones are mean and nasty to the extremest of extremes. And that is reflected in Dickensian. Scrooge is a horrible, nasty man who hates Christmas and doesn't feel anything, etc., etc. While it is pretty faithful in that regard, given some solid performances and a couple of bits and pieces added here and there, I did buy into the characters. Although, yes, some of the stuff that it adds to them is kind of really fanficky, such as the implication that Jacob Marley visited prostitutes. Yeah, still holding on to my theory that there's going to be some fucking before the end of the series. I bet that Dickensian will do slash fiction sooner or later. As said, I haven't watched the whole thing yet, so I can't say whether or not what I have to say in this thing's favour gets totally undermined by how it ends. The worst thing I can think of is that Charles Dickens himself shows up as a character, and then it turns out that this crossover of characters is all a matrix projection by his exhumed brain in a space museum in the future. And given what happened in the recent Sherlock special, well, anything's possible.